Okay, welcome back to the In My Beach Boys Room podcast. I am Adam Schreiner, sitting here with Matthew Hartz, and we're going to cover pretty much almost an entire decade in this episode, 81 up through 89.
Yeah, basically
the 80s. Mm-hmm. Before we do that, we're going to do our usual beginning here, and we're going to do the social media stuff. You can follow us on Instagram at Matthew Hartz Music, Facebook, just facebook.com/Matthew Hartz. And search Matthew Hartz, look for the kid with holding the banjo. And then obviously YouTube, just search Matthew Hartz Music on YouTube. And please just do all those subscribing and liking and commenting. We've had a ton of comments lately, so that's awesome. And
we got to talk about that a little bit too.
So Matthew, as you can see from the videos, the recordings, he is a fantastic musician, and so he goes and plays gigs all over, and that's for the past 4 weeks. Literally, I just mentioned as we were setting up for the podcast today, I was like, how are you still going? Because you must have been going nonstop. You called me from Burns yesterday, or Bend, and said, I'm in Bend, I'll be ready to go for the podcast tomorrow morning. And I was like, wow, this guy, whatever you're drinking,
No. I'm not drinking the same stuff I used to. Lots of good water.
Yeah. And so because of that, he has not had a chance to get to a lot of these comments, but believe me, I know Matthew, he loves talking Beach Boys. So those of you that have commented, that's one of his things on his to-do list, is to get on there and start commenting on some of those.
Actually, let's be honest. Adam's going to teach me how to access the comment section afterwards, after we get done with this episode and song today. And I really think I'm losing my knowledge about all things digital. I apologize because some of it is I just don't know how to navigate it, guys, but I do want to get to the conversations and even, it's just stuff that I'm willing to engage with, and I've been gone for a while, and literally the last 2 weeks out of service in the middle of the California mountains, teaching at a great big music camp. So, and then no service at all, no calls, no emails, no nothing. And so I get back yesterday, and it's like a bomb went off
on your phone.
Yeah, and I'm not going to deal with any of that until we get done recording this podcast and stuff. That's what I'm doing. I'm taking everything in just little small bite-sized pieces. Maybe by this weekend I'll have everything lined out and I can relax a little bit.
Yeah, that's cool. So love the comments, and one thing is that when I look at these comments, we love the compliments, and I can, Matthew and I both can hop on and say thank you real quick. So we, appreciate all the compliments, but when you start getting into that real Beach Boys heavy conversation, that's, I kind of have to be hands off and let Matthew get on that. And, Matthew's and I, he's my Beach Boys expert, and, and he admitted numerous times that, sometimes he's wrong. And when he goes,
I make mistakes, and there's some things that, what I've been proven wrong on, and there's some things I wonder about. And I sure, I know we kind of started this thing as Matthew the Beach Boy expert, and I will admit on some levels I am, but there's some things that I don't have all the knowledge on. And, but there's a lot of things to be looked at from a lot of different ways too. And the thing is when I do get on those comments, like, it's for the last 2 weeks, like we talked, I haven't been able to at all. Even if I want to. Yeah. So I hope people don't think I've stood them up, because I'm definitely going to this weekend start digging into those babies.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you want to enlighten us and Matt on something, just drop, just leave a comment. And, we've been fortunate enough to not have any like nasty type comments. And so if we can keep this, community that we got going on here real respectful of each other, then, let's just bring on the conversation and go from there. So then you were doing the music camp, and then you did then we had the jazz festival, which I think we mentioned last time. And then the
Weezer Fiddle Festival, and then a lot of gigs in between that with the Cliff I play a lot with a really great guy named Cliff Miller, who's got a band that I play with a lot of the time, and we've been running around doing some pretty cool shows and going and doing some opening acts. We ran over to Pocatello the other day, and it's just kind of a cool deal with him. He's starting to take off a little bit.
That's awesome. We at least want to acknowledge the fact that he's been busy, and but he absolutely loves the Beach Boy interaction, and so you'll just, if you've left a comment, just pay attention, and you should get a response here.
I've been
shortly.
busy, but I'll tell you what, it's just even the people that at that camp I was teaching at, the people that have been enjoying the podcast, and I'm so kind of, it's not, it's pretty humbling, and they'll mention they're interested in it, and I'll say, oh yeah, I'll start talking about something in one of the episodes that I think they might, and they'll go, oh, I love that episode.
Yeah, which is cool.
Yeah. That was
awesome.
so.
Okay, so we got like in this 10-ish year period, we have several albums. I listened intently to 3 of them, like really closely, but there's like Carl's solo album and all that. So
Carl's solo albums,
and so
Mike's
and Mike's, which I didn't check.
Yeah,
out Mike's.
that's okay.
But let's get started, and then we can kind of hit everything as we go through the.
We'll
the
just
history.
hit the albums as we get
Perfect.
to them, and I mentioned before we got started, I felt like, man, we're back to like doing a real broad period of time. I'm kind of minimizing some things, and something like Carl's solo records, I certainly don't want to minimize.
Sure.
However, I'm going to look at the whole. When I think of the Beach Boys' career, and I think of the real watershed solo albums as far as benchmarks, definitely Pacific Ocean Blue, because it was the first one, and but for other reasons also. But then Brian's first one, like we're going to cover today. We won't cover all of Brian's solo albums in depth, but
this one,
this one especially, because I think it was so monumental where it came in. But anyway, let's get back to talking about just around the time of 1981.
Okay.
And the big thing is Carl quits.
Oh, really?
Carl quit the Beach Boys.
Okay. And so is Dennis, and refresh me here, where's Dennis?
Dennis is alive and involved. And Brian is involved, but not very healthy, getting the heaviest he's ever been.
Okay.
Over 300 and some pounds. Wow. And getting back on the substances pretty bad, having to be hospitalized a few times through this period.
Okay.
So he's not doing good, but he's part of the deal. Everybody else but Carl quits.
Okay.
You want to know why?
I literally was just about to ask.
He had become disgusted with just the attitudes with everybody in the band, just the lack of rehearsals. He didn't like some of the Vegas type gigs that they were getting, that were just things that they could just coast on. They could go play a dinner show and then he said we could play a real turkey of it. This is almost an exact quote. He said we could play a real turkey of a set, and still people will come up afterwards and say it's the greatest thing they've ever heard in their lives. And he said that's not, and his famous quote from that period was, I'm not going to come back until our attitudes are not like it's 1981, but like it's 1961.
Wow.
And so with that, he kind of left them. And man, it was, we'll talk about some of the concerts and how poor they were without Carl. But the first thing we're going to talk about is his first solo album that he released,
so he quits and releases.
Yes, and probably I think maybe he knew that the solo albums were in the works, and probably thought, I'm going to quit and work on my own stuff for a while. Probably.
Okay.
He had started a collaboration with. So Jerry Schilling was his manager, and subsequently became the Beach Boys manager. And this guy was married to a gal named Myrna Smith Schilling, and she was one of Elvis Presley's backup singers. Jerry Schilling was also a manager of Elvis's. So this is all the Elvis and the Beach Boys world collides a little bit at this point. But Carl wrote a lot of these tunes with her on I think the first record especially. The Hold Me single off that is a real tough little rocker. I love that. And of course, there's Heaven on here, which is one of Carl's most beautiful tunes. And those are real highlights. Other than, there's some other great music on there, but I have to admit the first time I heard these things, I was expecting an album full of The Trader and Feel Flows and those types of tunes.
Right, right.
But this was an opportunity for Carl to do something way different, and he did.
And he did, yeah.
And I think they're awesome albums. Jeff Baxter of the Doobie Brothers helped him put some of these things together, and Jimmy Garcia again is heavily involved, just like he is with Dennis's solo record.
And so, any other Beach Boys involved with
I'm
this?
sure. I haven't seen. Well, I know Billy was really involved. Just being the brother-in-law, but he went out and toured with Carl. They opened for the Doobie Brothers, for a while on tour, and there's one show that I think Carl just did it himself at the Roxy.
Okay.
And Dennis showed up in a tux, but just out of his mind.
Oh.
But was there to.
And he's just touring with them as just Carl Wilson.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And there's some stuff on the internet. He played on. There's a TV show back then called Solid Gold. That was kind of like a hit dance show that would come on every week back then. And,
well, and when I listened to it, it's you nailed it pretty much on the head. Where kind of excited to listen to a solo album from Carl based off of especially based off of how I felt about Dennis's solo album. I loved the Pacific Ocean Blue, and I think that with that expectation, like it's not necessarily like a bad album, but you have this expectation, and then because you have this expectation and it doesn't meet that expectation, it just feels like it's not as good as it actually might be. Because when I listened to it, it just felt very mediocre listening, which is I know it's not, but just listening through it, just like there's not really nothing that really hits home for me anyway.
That Heaven. I will say,
Heaven,
is
and Hold Me. Is that
I did.
Those, for sure. Those ones,
and I need to think more. And I'm going to be honest. These are I need to. It's been a while since I've listened. But I do like the albums. I think Expectation. If we put that in where we had this high expectation or whatever, it still meets the high expectation for me, just in a different way than I thought it was going to. It's definitely been enlightening to know, oh wow, Carl was into a certain, there is a different thing that, what's cool is it's not like any really kind of like the Beach Boys
at
stuff
all.
At all. And some people say that it was commercial enough at the time that if this would have been Beach Boys stuff, it would have been, because we think of his tunes off Keeping the Summer Alive, the Rockers, this is kind of like moving more in that vein.
Well, it was kind of interesting too, just a little side note here. When I looked it up on Spotify, because that's like kind of my main, music platform that I use. You're talking even like Heaven and Hold Me, 60,000 listens. That's like nothing. That's nothing. Brian's solo album, millions, and it was just kind of wild that still even Carl Wilson, being who he is on, the platform is still only very, very, less than 100,000, right. Just above 50. So
what about, I wonder what Pacific Ocean Blue, I'll bet you it's pretty.
I think it was up there too. It caught that low number caught my eye, where the other ones, it's like such a big number, I couldn't even tell you. It was like, it made sense, so I thought that was kind of an interesting thing where, Pacific Ocean Blue, I literally, it's like, I'll have one of those songs pop in my head and like, I need to go put it on, anyway, but.
Well, it's, let's move on a little bit in 81 and let's talk about, there was one really bad concert and it was nationally televised, and it was at Long Beach, and it was a deal that Wolfman Jack was, I don't know if he promoted it, but he was a big part of it. He was a guy back in the day, one of the personalities, big in the late 70s and probably early 80s, but Brian singing, like if I compare it to just like the Nebworth show a year before that, where he was on. It's just really curious to see how Brian can change show to show on stuff.
Right.
But anyway, he was called upon to sing God Only Knows and Don't Worry Baby for that show, and it was nationally and it was not good.
Oh no.
And people after that show, I didn't see it live. I've seen stuff on the internet, but people were like going, "Oh, the next, the reports were it's not good." I think some of it, they were trying to blame it on the TV mix, but you can't blame the bad singing on the mix.
Sure,
what I mean?
yeah.
But it was just, I think mainly for that reason, it's considered to just be not a good show in history. And Carl not being there, Dennis is in pretty good shape, and it seems, even though this is not a great time for him physically. Sometimes here in the early 80s, you see him and he looks pretty good, but it's not too long after this until he's, he starts to, his body starts to bloat and
Right.
change quite a bit from the edema from the alcohol.
Uh-huh.
But anyway, there was that show and some others. I'm sure that none of them were very strong without Carl.
Sure.
In mid-summer of July, and I remember the next year at junior high, they were playing a lot at the dances at lunchtime. There was a medley that came out. I can't remember what the tunes started. I think it started with Surfing USA, and they had Surfing Safari, had Good Vibrations on the end, but it was like 4 or 5 tunes edited into a medley, and it hit the charts.
Really?
In 81, yes. And I've got the single back there. I didn't research what it did, but it made some noise.
Uh-huh.
And so that was one bright spot as far as just chart performance, no new music. Also in 81, Mike's solo album, I think, came out in the end of the year, Looking Back with Love. And let's just say those things are nicely produced.
Okay.
And, some of it's...
Yeah, I didn't have a chance to listen to that one.
Some of it's interesting, but I don't even feel like it's that's not part of Mike's career that we need to talk about too much. Maybe we'll do it in the Mike episode that's coming up.
Okay, sounds good.
There's also an important compilation that came out in 1981 that was called 10 Years of Harmony, which covered the period from Sunflower up through Keeping the Summer Alive. And they took all the cherry-picked cuts from all the albums through the 70s and it's a really satisfying greatest hits album. You know that gatefold that I have in the 70s room with all the members, and it's a famous shot of them, but that's the gatefold of that album. And it's just I love that because it highlighted that music that nobody was paying attention to. It brought a little bit more attention to it. And but out of that, Come and Go With Me from MIU.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it was on this compilation, and they released it as a single, and it went to number 18.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Nice.
So that was Al's cover thing that he did. Yeah. So that's pretty cool.
Nice. Absolutely.
So that's pretty much wrapping up 81.
81. Okay.
Yeah, the first thing I have for 82 is Carl's back.
Okay. He's back.
And
So they got their attitudes in check.
They did. I think that somebody realized how bad they needed Carl Wilson.
Sure.
I mean, and I don't know how much it was. I don't know about the whole inside of the story, but I did know he wanted them to get their acts together.
Sure.
But Brian's in really bad shape. Brian is really starting to deteriorate. And there is I think the hospital was called the Brotman. There was a stay in the hospital, and he actually ended up seeing the nurse that took care of him in the hospital. And she
dating the nurse?
We moved in with her.
Oh,
and it just wasn't the great. They rented the Beach Boys management rented him a little house up in he's not and so he was living with this gal, and I think there's sometimes a girlfriend named Debbie Keel who's part of the landscape since the late 70s too. It's an interesting situation to say the least. Not healthy at all. As a matter of fact, there's a a journalist from England, Nick Kent, that comes and writes a piece on Brian. He interviews him in this house, and he leaves. He's just like, I can't believe what he's just saw, because it's just, Brian is, literally, some of the stories are funny, but one of them is just watching him dig into a salad and smoking at the same time, and the ashes falling off the cigarette, and cigarette burns all over the wooden floor where he'd just smoke and, throw the,
Jeez.
I mean, yeah.
Not good stuff.
It was really bad. And so what happened is Carl, and I'm sure Carl and Jerry Schilling, who I think by this time was having a bigger part, or was the manager of the Beach Boys, and they got together and they wanted Brian to see Dr. Landy again. And Brian didn't want to have nothing to do with it. Mm-hmm. And so he kept on pulling shit just getting back, and so I think it was in November, and in his first autobiography is the most vivid telling of it. But he said, I wanted some Coke before I went over there, but Carolyn, the nurse, right, said, nope, she was driving, you can smoke a joint, but no Coke, So he's heading to this corporate meeting with the Beach Boys. Dennis wasn't there, but there was Dennis' signature on it. In November of 1982, ladies and gentlemen, if you guys don't know this already, Brian Wilson was fired from the Beach Boys.
Oh, wow. Brian Wilson
was fired.
Wow. And so you're saying that...
and he was...
Dennis wasn't there, but his signature
was. No,
his
signature was on it, but and everybody else was there. But it was, the whole scheme was concocted to get by Carl, and in collaboration with others and Dr. Landy, to get Brian to succumb to his help again, because they thought it's the only thing that ever, worked in the past. And so, yeah.
Wow.
Pretty wild, huh?
Wow. So
I don't know if I finished my thought there.
No, it's actually, you're just saying so he's actually fired, or it is just...
No, he is actually fired. No, he is fired.
It is a real deal, contractual fired. Got it. Okay.
And he's just beside himself, but he has to...
so he's fired, like, under the conditions that if he gets help he can come back, or like what's the...
I think I got to go back and read exactly, but it was basically an ultimatum. The only way you've got a shot is if you see Landy again.
Got it. Okay.
After which the deal was done, and once Brian made that decision, they literally kind of kidnapped him.
Yeah.
They went and got him and took him to the airport. They checked all of his, before they left, because they were going to take him to Hawaii. They took him to Hawaii because they wanted to get him away from this gal. They wanted to just have a complete removal. They were going to reset Brian Wilson. By golly, they did too.
Right.
And he got healthier. The gal, she ended up having a press conference in LA saying that somebody had kidnapped, and then Brian had to have a press conference in Hawaii saying he wasn't kidnapped, and so it gets, kind of wild in some of this.
Okay. So then,
and I want to talk a little bit more about what happened when he got there, because I mean, he did a hard, no cigarettes, no alcohol,
hard stop,
no cocaine, no, nothing, and intravenous vitamin drips, blended juices for breakfast. First breakfast, he was looking for the bacon and eggs. Hey, here's your glass of juice, buddy.
Wow.
And we're going to start walking today.
Wow.
They got him to where he was walking in a very short time, like not very long at all. They had him. He'd lost 100 and some pounds, and he was obviously healthier and off the drugs. And it's amazing if you look at that 2 or 3 month window where it's just amazing what they got him back.
The shape they got him back.
Oh
in.
Yeah, I'll show you from going from 315 and this. The worst pictures, you just don't even recognize him anymore.
Right.
It's unrecognizable. Uh-huh. And then, a complete shift. So once again, Landy has saved the day,
Yeah.
I don't know if it gets there without him.
Right.
But then this starts the famous period that's, Love and Mercy references of where he just, goes on to start exerting a Svengali-like control over everything. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get going, but better keep talking about 83 right now and what else is going on. Carl releases another solo album. This one...
Okay, sorry, hold on. I want to make sure we got a lot of years to cover here. I want to make sure I'm staying on track. So 82 we did the he got fired, right?
Brian did.
Okay,
and
so
then beginning of 83, they take him to Hawaii.
Okay.
And the first few months,
okay, good.
He's there.
Got it. Okay, sorry.
They get him healthier. I don't know where it falls in the timeline, but Carl's solo album Youngblood is released.
Okay.
And is to me it's kind of more of the same. The single "What You Do to Me" I think is what was off that. I'm not
yeah,
quite
I think
sure.
so too.
Okay, and again it was, but he was already back in the Beach Boys and he was kind of shutting this part of things down. So it's kind of like how much effort anyway. It was another good album, but still more of the same from the first one is what I would say. Other thing in 83, so that I told you about the big concerts that they started playing at the Washington Monument starting in 1980.
Right.
500,000.
Yeah, I remember.
It was a big deal, and they did it the next 2 years. Well, the Reagan administration had been in, since 80, right? Well, I think it was the Interior Secretary at the time, James Watt, who was a very conservative guy. He decided that the Beach Boys were attracting the wrong element and that they were going to hire like a Las Vegas person like Wayne Newton or something like that. And so anyway, he basically fired the Beach Boys from the 4th of July gig. People are pissed. President Reagan is pissed. Vice President Bush is pissed. They give that guy a shoot yourself in the foot award that he has to show on TV. And he says the president likes him and the first lady likes him, and I'm sure that when I like him, when meet him, I'll get to like him too. So I made a mistake, and everything.
Wow.
But the publicity was huge. It was all over national news and everything and people were driving around in New York City with "Honk If You Like the Beach Boys" signs on their cars. So it was another, even though it was kind of a negative thing, they weren't getting that concert, right? It's still, the publicity was
drawing attention to them
in gold, and so that was kind of funny. I remember seeing all that in real time. Yeah, so that was all going on in the early part of the year, and so instead of playing the Washington Monument, they played at Atlantic City in New Jersey on the beach.
Okay.
For the 4th of July. It's Dennis's last 4th of July. And Dennis, there's video footage of him coming out and barely being able to speak. "You are so beautiful," just one line of it. And then, and then kind of walks back to his body, he's bloated, but he also his joint, he's damaged his body from accidents so much that he walks real rigidly and
interesting,
and so it's a real crazy thing to see. And that was his last 4th of July, and he didn't do any singing obviously, but he played the drums with gusto, and did it, always loved playing. But September was his last show. I think they say the Pomona County Fairgrounds in LA someplace was his last show with the Beach Boys, and then he died in December.
Right. Okay.
So there we've got that. 84, very early on, because of the friendship with the Reagan administration, the Wilson family gets the special permission to bury Dennis at sea. So that's done in January. They have a press conference, the Beach Boys, that we're going to be going on, and Dennis would want us to go on. But other than that, in 84, it's pretty quiet, and appropriately so. It's I'm kind of glad that I'm sure they didn't really feel like it either, especially the brothers, So get into 85. One of the things that's cool about 85, and I got it, I think in 87, but it came out in 85, is the first big documentary video. It was called An American Band, and it had the first Tammy footage. When I finally seen it, that was the first time. I've talked about it on our podcast before. That just blew my mind. I'd never seen any early footage of them actually playing on a stage. Put that in perspective, folks, with the internet now.
Yeah.
We didn't have that. This is the first time. I was 18, I think probably 87 when I saw that video, but that was the very first time I saw the Beach Boys live footage of them playing early on, like in the 60s.
Right.
It was, I wish people could feel the feeling that I felt when I saw that, and when I saw how amazing they were on that live show. They kicked ass.
Yeah.
And that video's got a lot of great things on it, but that's the thing that really pops out to me.
Yeah.
So that was cool. They're working on a new album without Dennis, right? Well, the last one before that didn't even happen because he barely showed up for the sessions on keeping some of them live anyway. So, this album they go to England to make, and they're making it with a producer named Steve Levine. Another guy Bruce Johnston had made a connection with, but he was the current producer of a band at the time called Culture Club. Karma, chameleon, and all that stuff. You're familiar with that?
Yeah, I love that song.
Okay, and that's Boy George, all that stuff, right? Well, anyway, he was kind of a hot guy at the time, and he took on producing the Beach for a new 80s record, and I'll tell you what, that album is well produced. And it was the first.
This one?
And the digital, this was the Beach Boys' first introduction to working digitally.
Oh.
Like with digital recording techniques, and just like, well, what, how can you do? And so they did a lot of really cool stacking of vocals, making the vocals sound really full. And this guy was a really great producer. I mean, it sounds like a Beach Boys record of the time, of the 80s, right?
And, you're hitting all my notes. You're like hitting right now. So,
but the funniest thing about it is Brian came in, and this is a couple years after, a year and a half after just getting healthy. He's played a few Beach Boys shows with them. Even shortly after in 83, Landy would have him go do a few little appearances with him, right? So it's not like he's not doing anything, but he came in to this project over in England, and his probably singing was a little bit rusty, but at one point, Levine, I don't know if Brian solicited his opinion or said, "What do you think?" And he says, "You don't know what I really think?" He said, "I think you need some singing lessons."
Wow.
But get this. Brian I don't know if maybe there was a confrontation in the moment, but guess what Brian does?
What's that?
He went and got singing lessons
Nice.
the next couple of days, and got a coach, just work with him on getting it. He doesn't have the strength and the quality of his voice that it was in the 60s or even the late 70s. In some ways, his voice starts to get stronger here again, and it has a resurgence because he's so healthy, and it does, especially when we get up into the solo album. But it's, he definitely, I could see where Levine was coming from when he said you need some singing lessons, and what it probably, it spurred Brian to do that. Instead of Brian getting all pissed off about that and stomping off like I probably would have done. he actually
he was like, you know what? All right.
That dude's smart.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
yeah.
So anyway, that's a fun thing about that. But let's talk about that album. I want you to kind of lead me through
so let me grab my notes.
Your notes on the tunes.
So there's a couple things before as I was listening to this album, and it's just something that just in talking to you about music is that like music is so subjective, right?
Mm-hmm.
What someone might think is the greatest song ever to you is the most basic, simple song ever, And so I think that, it's important to remember that music is it's such a personal thing, and it hits everyone differently. I mean, someone could love, some death metal, and to me, they love that vibration when that hits their ears and hits their soul. But to me, that just sounds terrible. But to them, that's everything. Mm-hmm. And so it's just, one thing to remember, especially with people liking up to Love You, and then kind of think it, from what I had mentioned in previous episodes of After Love You, like it's not really,
pertinent.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But like, I absolutely loved this album.
Yeah,
I loved this album.
It is.
And it's funny you said I didn't know that about the digital part. And one thing I said I wrote down is that the background vocals especially seemed stuck out to me as like very on point.
Yeah, that's because they were manipulated a little bit too. Probably.
Probably.
Well, I shouldn't say that. I mean, but it's the digital technology definitely brings that super clean.
Yeah, exactly. And I
to
definitely noticed that when I was listening. Like you said, this didn't hit me like Sunflower did, but it was similar in the feeling of like Sunflower was like, oh my God, I missed this amazing 70s album. And this is like the Beach Boys. Oh, I missed this amazing 80s album, of the Beach Boys. Like I don't think I knew any of these songs, and they all, not all of them, but they fit so well with that era, like so well. And I love 80s music. Like I love 80s music.
Me too.
So for me, it was just like this, I was putting this album on more than the others because it reminded me of the 80s music I love, and hearing all these songs I never heard before in this 80s style was just,
right.
I loved it. I loved the album.
I remember when it first came out, and I resonated with a lot of it right away, man.
Yeah. So then, I mean, your take on it, like musically, is it just not?
No, it's got some. There's a lot to talk about with the album.
Okay,
but it's like, it's almost like I'll start getting into the tracks.
Okay, let's
get you back.
Get you back right off the top. I mean,
and that went to number 26. And the
the
album went to number 50. So that's really great for them at that time.
It's just like this from this song, the perfect blend of Beach Boys doing the 80s.
Yeah,
like the Beach Boys doing the 80s. Like this is exactly what it is, and loved it from this song. I don't think there's a single song I actually don't like on this album.
The front end to Get You Back. So they start with that drum pattern, and Brian kind of helped. They wanted to come up with something that mimicked what Dennis would have done on the there's kind of a reinvention of what Dennis does on the front end of Don't Worry Baby. That's why they start with that as a tree. They recorded that in a racquetball court to get that real deep echo of that.
Yeah.
And so, but then the cool thing is it's got a classic mic vocal, but they got Brian. That's Brian singing the falsetto part.
Oh, nice
on there, and so it's really kind of it's pretty strong. I remember hearing that for the first time. Go, whoa, that's stronger than I was expecting. Thinking. This is, good, great.
Yeah, good.
I think I probably heard it on the radio before I got the album. Probably,
well, I mean, and just
you back.
like such a way to grab you and, get ready for an album, because this is what we got coming. And then, it's getting late, like same sort of feel, just like this 80s.
That's
Beach
a
Boys
Carl
blend.
thing that some of that was written with some of the, I think that one, maybe I need to look. I know Passing Friend for sure might have been written with, George O'Dowd, who I think is Boy George.
Oh,
yeah. So there was some of those Carl tunes on there are collaborations with people I'm unfamiliar with. So
and this is a Carl tune. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, this one all around the music, the vocal,
Carl's vocal.
Oh, Carl!
I
put
this
Carl
whole
on
record.
Here.
Carl is
Carl
God.
In this one is like. You get so many of those like magical hair-raising Carl moments in this album. Like I have that on several songs, which for me is like some of my favorite Beach Boys songs are the ones that have those Carl moments. Because when he comes in with those that vocal, and it's a lot of it's when how he comes in. Mm-hmm. It's the approach to how not just. Him singing, but it's how he comes in on it.
A master of delivery.
Yeah.
A master,
Yeah, exactly how he's delivering it.
Yeah.
Crack at Your Love. I don't have anything specific. I just like the song.
Yeah, that's kind of a little bit of a more pedestrian one. I think that's one of, God, I mean, I need to know my credits a little bit more on this. I want to think that's a Brian and maybe an Al. I know California Calling's Brian and Al mainly, but I'm not sure. I think that's a Brian tune though.
Yeah, well, and I mean, like you said,
Not one of my favorites from the album.
Yeah, no, and it's not like I disliked it where I want to skip it, but there's nothing. I really didn't have anything in it. Maybe I don't know.
Yeah, that's another one of those that Carl did in I think collaboration with some of those other guys.
Yeah, and it's just like the how the comes in with the beat and like the electric guitar, like it's just so
it's 80s.
It's
yeah,
so
yeah,
80s,
and then Carl's vocal is so good.
Yeah,
again,
and this is probably this one got stuck in my head. Whenever they get stuck in my head, that's usually,
it really does have that this one in particular. When I'm thinking about it, you bet.
She Believes in Love Again.
Oh,
just a great
that's
slow
Bruce's.
jam. Oh, Bruce, I wrote.
Yeah.
Brucey Bruce.
Yeah.
Did he write it?
Yeah.
And then
I'm sure.
And then Carl comes in.
Yeah.
Oh, God,
but Bruce's. I like how Bruce's vocals kind of edgy on the front of it.
Yeah.
I woke up.
Yeah.
I spoke up. Just a little bit of sand in his vocal that's not usually there.
It's
but then Carl
he's
comes in with that. Come on. Man, that's some I remember having that on a loop because this was one of the first CDs I had, guys. This was when CDs were brand new. I did get the vinyl too eventually, but I purchased this. Was the first Beach Boy album I ever got on a compact disc.
Nice.
And so I would put that on this. Let's see. Hang on, because there's two beautiful Carl ones that I put on. Oh, this is the She Believes in Love Again. Yeah, that stayed on repeat a lot. Yeah,
I mean, this
beautiful.
is like get your lighters out, start swaying. This is just
it's just beautiful music.
Yeah,
too.
just absolutely beautiful. And like literally when Bruce starts singing, I was like, I literally said out loud, "Oh, Brucey Bruce, just doing the Bruce thing,"
Yeah.
Then we go to California Calling.
Brian and Al thing. It's kind of fun.
Yeah,
kind of reprises some of their stuff,
bringing back their old style a little bit.
And I like how Ringo Starr's playing drums on that one.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Like on that recording?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. Passing Friend.
That's another one with one of the Culture Club guys, I think, and that's I like it all right. That's not a super favorite of mine.
Yeah, I like this one, and there's another Carl moment on this one when he comes in and I think it's on the chorus, but it's like in the child's eyes or something. But how he comes in, there's like this. I think it's like a xylophone or something. That's like, and there's like that cool little thing that one of those songs that like that moment alone is what kind of keeps me wanting to listen to because it's like
maybe I need to listen to Passing Friend a little bit more.
Well, and maybe I'll show you because I want to know. I think do they have a xylophone? Is that something that was part of their?
Through the years, they had all kinds of instruments, like mallet instruments that are basic, set up like a keyboard.
Or I didn't know because there's been many times when I thought what I was hearing was an instrument. It's just like a synthy thing that they're doing. So I should play that and have you listen and see if that's what's going on there. I'm So Lonely. This one grew on me.
This is a Brian tune.
Yeah,
and Dr. Landy gets
tell.
Credit on these tunes, and they wondered if Brian didn't have some better tunes that he was saving for the solo album. Right, there was a little bit because some of these tunes are a little bit
because we're in '85 and the solo album
the solo
comes
is
in.
coming out, but we'll get into talking about that. I need to shut up.
Okay, Where I Belong.
Oh. That's another one of my
the chorus on this one.
Oh, don't need no more exotic. Yeah. Oh man.
Yeah.
And the singing on it is just and the music on the verses, the chord progression, and Carl's vocal is just supreme.
Yeah. And there's something. Yeah, we might want to throw this out. Because I also have on this part. There's like this background vocal that kind of happens on the second chorus that doesn't happen on the first. That I think it's Carl, but it's just like, damn, that comment just damn the some of these vocals on this album are just absolutely just
they worked hard on it.
Well, and especially
but they had the advantage of the digital being able to save them some time now.
Right. Well, and just me as someone who automatically goes, just like a lot of people automatically goes to the vocals first, not necessarily the music first. For me, just on the first pass through to just be like, damn, these vocals are just absolutely crushing it right now. So, but moving on, I Do Love You.
Okay. Fun story about this.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, So Steve Levine, that producer, he came to L.A. after they'd been over in England with him to finish up things. And this is from an interview I saw of him on the internet a while ago. He tells that story about getting Brian to do the singing lessons. But anyway, he knew how to work a piece of machinery or had a piece of machinery that was brand new. And Stevie Wonder heard about it, and he called him and said, "Hey, I want to hire you to come over and look at this because I can't get it to work right with my new digital equipment. I mean, you're one of the only guys in the world that and everything." And oh yeah, well, I'm working on this project with the Beach Boys right now. I'll come over there and when he got over there, Stevie asked him. He goes, "Hey, are they looking for any tunes?" And he goes, "Well, I don't know what you got." And he goes, "Well, I've got this one." So that ends up this is a Stevie Wonder tune. He came in and played everything. He played the bass, the harmonica, the electric piano.
No kidding.
Yeah. And then Carl and Al sing it. And so, it's a cool story. So that's a Stevie Wonder tune.
No kidding. That's awesome.
By the Beach Boys.
Yeah, and I love that song. I actually wrote, I love the music on this one.
Yeah, compare now listen to it again. Just all the electric piano noises on there that are just so signature Stevie, stuff.
Totally.
And then you go, because I was amazed when I read that in the liners too. What,
That's
and how
crazy.
that came about. It's like, hey, did they, thinking about Stevie Wonder asking, hey, do they need any tunes for the? It's just so cool.
Yeah, for sure. It's just a matter of time.
That's a Brian and Landy thing, but I like it.
I like it too. And there's
like a doo-wop, old doo-wop
and then they
feel
throw
to it.
the doo-wop with the harmonica. I think is there a harmonica on it?
Yes, yeah.
So the fact that you put this harmonica with this doo-wop, that blend of the style, I thought was super interesting. The fact that the harmonica almost gives it like this country folky, sort of feel, but then you have the doo-wop going on as well.
You just reminded me of something too that I got to tell you, because I didn't give you enough props when we were in the episode that had MIU, and you were talking about the beginning to Peggy Sue sounding like it was like the beginning of You're So Good to Me. When I finally it's just a little, it's the same notes, just a slightly different. But you picked up on that better than I ever did.
Oh,
and so here you go.
Lucky,
I mean, here you are making an observation that I've really never thought about before. But it is uncommon. But it's more of Brian's been doing it all through his years, all through the career. Doing uncommon things.
Sure.
And I don't know whose idea it was, whether it producer or his or whatever. But it is. Yeah. Kudos to you, man.
Got it.
The guy telling the expert.
Yeah, well, and that specifically is because that was one of those songs that was always played when I was a kid. So I'm real familiar with You're So Good to Me. And so when I heard it, I was,
Yeah, but anyway, okay, back to
last
1985.
Last one, Male Ego. And
that wasn't on the album.
Oh, okay.
That was released as the B-side of a track, and it was included as a bonus track as like on some of the CD re-releases and stuff, but it wasn't originally part of the album.
Okay,
Male
all right,
Ego.
and it wasn't my favorite.
Yeah, that's a Brian and Landy thing again, though, too. Kind of a quirky deal of his.
Yeah, no, I mean this. I absolutely love this album. This is. I love listening to it. I would listen to it even when sometimes I have to force myself to really listen to to intently listen, but. I know I really love something when it's like I'm just cruising in my car and I want to put this album on, or I am, singing, Passing Friend because it's stuck in my head or what, so, love this album. Really glad that I, had never heard it before because
for you.
Yeah. And so, but still got a lot to get through. So
in 85, I want to talk about one big show in Philadelphia. And I think it was in summertime, but there was an international. They had it on both sides of the Atlantic, like one in Philadelphia and one in Europe someplace, but it was nationally televised probably around the 4th of July, I'm kind of thinking, but it was called Live Aid, and they played a set there, and it was really good, and Brian was with them and took a lead on Wouldn't It Be Nice, and if you compare it to his lead.
Live Aid, is this
kind of like Farm Aid?
I know, was Live Aid always was it an annual thing?
Kind of was in those, but I think maybe. I don't get me to line.
Because I just know like Queen had their big.
I think that might have been the
same one.
Same one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But there were a lot of performers at that deal.
And Elton John was Elton John at that
probably.
one. Okay.
I don't. It was a several day festival with so many people.
Got it.
Performing, but that's a big notable show, and they showed up and played well, and even Brian.
Nice.
And
okay.
So new energy going into '86, which this here, kids, is the 25th anniversary of the Beach Boys at this point, and that's where I have worn this shirt in episodes and in some of the videos we've made, but that's a original from that year for the 25th anniversary.
And so where'd you get that?
I can't. I had a thrift shop someplace.
Oh, nice.
I've gotten it. I didn't have it then, but
right.
Yeah.
You found it. That's awesome.
Yeah, just part of but love it. Love that thing. And the 25th anniversary was big. Brian was back and kind of healthy. He was a featured part of that deal. Dennis, of course, wasn't there, but they did a special taped on the beach in Hawaii. That's awesome. It's a really good show. And I remember coming home from a big fiddle deal in Montana, and I rushed home to watch that on TV, and it was pretty huge. I think I was probably a junior in high school or something like that. Made in the USA, which is a compilation that came out that year in celebration of the 25th anniversary, was a pretty big compilation. I remember getting it and it reigniting some things for me even. This is the period when I finally got, these years is when I finally heard Pet Sounds in its entirety, because it wasn't in print for so many years, couldn't find a copy,
Right.
So young, didn't know how to do it, blah, blah, blah. They also, the Beach Boys, I know they released it. They might have recorded it a couple years earlier, but they did a version of the Mamas and Papas California Dreamin' that I always thought they should do. I always thought, man, and they did it. And it was, I don't know what it did chart wise, but it's a great recording. And the Beach Boys, I love the original version, but I also love listening to the Beach Boys version, especially for Carl.
Yeah.
It just tears it up. Main thing in '86, though, from a significant standpoint as far as Brian goes, is and it was facilitated by Landy, he started working with Gary Usher again. Gary Usher from 1962, who he wrote 409 with, who he wrote The Lonely Sea with. Some of the very early, it was one of his earliest ever collaborators. And very, Landy, I'm not sure why he reached out to Gary, but Gary was a wonderful guy. He passed of cancer not too long after that, but just an amazing guy. He went on to do some great things after he and Brian worked together, significant in the recording industry, right? So somehow he was contacted and asked if he wanted to work with Brian. And he said, yeah, sure. And he ended up paying for a lot of the studio time himself, and he was giving a lot of himself and Landy was interfering a lot, and so it was a real frustrating period. A guy in Australia named Stephen McFarlane wrote a book about it that he called the Wilson Project, and it's basically documenting, Brian, at what Brian's mental health state was actually at this, and even though he looked physically healthier, there was still some mental stuff going on and all that. The Landy stuff and people not knowing if it was good for him. And when Landy wasn't around, he said, "What we need is a hit of heroin or something." No, we don't. Or even there was one conversation that was had when Landy, when they were actually alone, Brian said some pretty unnerving stuff.
Sure.
Like maybe he wanted to go swimming and not come back.
Yeah.
That type, but nobody knew how to really handle it. So that went over the next 2 years, Brian and Gary Usher working together, and finally Gary Usher wasn't being paid. It was just a mess. And he kind of said, you guys you're taking advantage of me now, in a big way. And so he stepped out, but a gentleman named Andy Paley, because Brian had signed in '87, signed a deal with Sire Records to make a solo album. okay, and was already working on stuff. And but they brought in this Andy Paley, who I know at the time he worked on the Dick Tracy soundtrack. He and his brother have some history as musicians going back to maybe even the late 60s, but he's just an awesome musician who was the perfect guy for Brian to work with at the time. Very understanding of the mental situation, and was just going to go in there and be a nest for Brian, but also he knew how to get all the sounds Brian wanted from this. Like he was an expert on 60s sounds for guitars and organs and stuff so Brian was just immediately drawn to him, but they start writing together. They put together a few more tunes, and then so Andy is basically the main collaborator on Brian's first solo album and working with him, even though Landy gets a lot of credits and the engineers are all working on it and everything. But I think if you had to say a main collaborator for Brian on the solo record, it's Andy. And Andy is just, man, he is an amazing musician, and they went on to work on what was going to be the second one, Sweet Insanity, together, and a lot of good music was made there too. But I just wanted to kind of push that out there. The album's not released until later in '88, but this shift from Usher, I just thought it was so cool that Usher and Brian worked together again. What a really poignant aside is that a few years later, when it wasn't too long after this that Usher passed away, and Brian went to see him one time and said Gary said he felt like that one time he really wasn't Brian, he was more like a Landy Brian. But then another time he drove to the hospital himself and came in there and just sat down beside his bed and held his hand and cried.
Oh, wow.
He said the real Brian showed up that day, So anyway, that's 87. We're going, the shift from Usher to Paley, and I don't know if it can be condensed so much into that, but let's just say,
for sake of time.
Yeah, 88. Okay, I think it was in January. Beach Boys were among the first inductees that include Bob Dylan, Beatles, Elvis Presley to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Or maybe it was they're either the first or the second year. Maybe the first year is Elvis and Chuck Berry and all those guys. But anyway, it's like it was an honor. They were honored the way they should have been.
Sure.
And Mike famously got up and gave this ridiculous rant, challenged Mick Jagger, who was in the audience, to I'll bet you, all kinds of people. He was just being an ass and embarrassing the rest of the guys because they're standing up there with him. They make their little speeches.
Like not being humble. Is that?
No, and he was. You can see the whole thing on the internet if you want to. But it was just kind of a real dick move on his part, and made the others uncomfortable and kind of shit on a otherwise
amazing moment.
Yeah, right. So anyway, that's that. One thing I want folks to really realize is that, that for those of you that saw Love and Mercy, the period that is featured in that, it jockeys from the Pet Sounds period to the period later in his life when he's, under Landy's thumb. This is that time.
This is a time.
This is when, Landy was keeping him from talking to friends and family. Keeping him separated from the Beach Boys for the most part. They didn't even have his phone number.
Right.
If you wanted to get him, you got through Landy.
Yeah.
And so this is
all from Love and Mercy. This is kind of where that movie's based off of, at least that part of the movie.
Well, I think it's if you want to go exactly, it's probably a little bit after the solo album when he was getting into Sweet Insanity and when he met Melinda.
Right.
But this is
that same.
This is the shadowing period. Yeah. Yes. I mean, everything is just like, it's a pretty wild situation when you think about it. He said, what does he say in Long Promise Road? I did my time for 9 years.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Yeah.
He literally was kind of in prison.
Yeah, for sure.
So anyway, let's go to where his solo album is released in August, and I was waiting for this thing, man. I saw it in Rolling Stone, and I remember coming and putting it on, and when Love and Mercy came out of the gate and I heard his voice and those harmonies when they came in, I was just on cloud nine. So with me giving that little setup, I'm going to lead you. You're going to take me through the tunes. Or
Well,
whatever.
yeah, and speaking of Love and Mercy, the first song on there is this is the first release of Love and Mercy.
That was when he wrote it.
This
And
is it.
and it
because-
became one of his signature tunes. for the
See, and
rest
all
of
my
his-
Beach Boys listening and stuff like that, I couldn't remember if this was on Love You or if we had heard it before, or because of the film that was done, and so so this is the first debut of Love and Mercy, right?
Yeah, well, this is when he wrote almost everything on here. Maybe it was some parts of these things were written a few years earlier, but most of it's Love and Mercy is pretty fresh at this time.
Yeah, well, and I mean, obviously, I love this song. Since I'm already familiar with this song, I really didn't need to really intently listen to it like I normally do. But what I will talk about here, and I don't know, at least on the version I did at the end or somewhere towards the end, Brian's just talking about the making of Love and Mercy.
Oh, that's on a bonus CD when he's talking. Yeah, and it's really cool.
It's cool.
Yeah, it's a new Brian.
Yeah, and he just he's talking about the how he thinks of love compared to mercy, like the difference between the two. And I just thought that was a really insightful little thing to have put on there.
That's a famous interview that he did around that time.
Oh,
and
okay.
they included that whole thing as part of one of the re-releases.
Which
of
is
the
probably
solo
what I
album.
was listening to.
Mm-hmm.
So then Walk the Line.
Yeah.
Just love it.
It's good. This is a cool tune. There was a guy, he was popular at the time. I think his name is Terrence Trent D'Arby, and he was a real popular, or at least semi-popular dude at the time that they got to come in and work on this tune specifically with Brian. Walk the Line's not my favorite song on the album, but it's a good solid track.
Yeah, and just this is when, okay, here I go again, pushing the headphones against my ears, trying to hear what's going on, and that was like, okay, now we're back to that Brian music, where you really gotta be present when you're listening,
Well, and this is also a very 80s record. It's just it's a lot of keyboards and very drum programming, and so it has an 80s flavor to it too, but it's lots of keyboard instruments with little tiny things going on.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's really cool.
And then Melt Away,
Oh.
which is so the I think it's a synth thing. There's like this synth thing that's
kind of going. I know what you're talking about. It's kind of overlaid the whole thing. The chord progression is sick, and that's our tune today. So as soon as we get done with this, we're gonna go make a little Melt Away.
Okay, are you putting that little
No. We're just gonna do it on guitar and
that's
fiddle.
what caught my attention on it.
Yeah.
Which is also an '80s kind of style that was being done.
Yeah. But I love that tune. That was a favorite when I first got it, and I drove to Texas for college. That was my second year of college. Me and John, my brother, and I listened to the album all the way down there on a really crappy cassette player in my old '76 Nova that was actually separate from the actual car, sitting down on the ground. Right, and we put that in there, but we listened to that. But Melt Away was a big favorite for both John and I.
Nice. Baby Let Your Hair Grow.
That's another great tune, man.
Not the biggest fan of the lyrics, typical of me and Brian songs, but love the music behind it,
Yeah, the lyrics on this whole thing, guess who helped with a little bit of some of that is Landy. So some of the more awkward moments, I'm sure, are his. What I was glad to see is in the re-release of the album on some of the versions when I can't remember when they did it, but they actually took some of Landy's credits off of it. Oh, because they discerned that he didn't actually help. And
sure.
So and Brian, so that's I was glad to see that.
Yeah, absolutely. Get out of here.
He should get a credit on anything for anything.
Yeah. Little Children.
Yeah, it's kind of that's a little snippet he kind of was working on that's based on another old folk tune, but it was just, kind of a fun thing like Mona from Love You. Would be kind of not in the same vein, but it's kind of
I wonder if this is the one that reminded me of Mona. I think there was one that reminded me of Mona that I didn't write down, but One for the Boys.
Yeah, that's that's just
awesome.
him.
That's just him
over. Yeah, all these are just him over. That's him
doing.
Yeah, him saying, "Here's one for the boys. Here's me singing all the parts for you guys." For.
Yeah,
all these are Brian's vocals.
No, I loved.
There are other singers on it.
It was really one of those things that I normally don't like to listen to, but it was just like, oh, this is pretty sweet. This sounds cool. So liked that one. There's so many.
Yeah. And that's the end of side 1 on the album, I think. And I remember the engineer. This is Mark Lynette's first working with Brian. The guy that did Feel Flows just recently. So this is his first stuff. I think he did some other stuff before this, but he was working with him. And I remember him. There was a quote from him in the Rolling Stone article that says, "Man, Brian, this sounds like John Lennon in some ways to him." And some people don't. But it's. I like the tune. It's not my favorite tune, but I can kind of see what Mark was saying about it. Some of the music type of stuff going on in it. Yeah.
Then the next song is actually Nighttime. It's actually my favorite tune on here.
He sang this on David Letterman. You can find that on the.
Oh, really?
In a leather suit, trying to do. It's some of the funniest stuff you've ever seen. And Landy was pushing all that stuff.
Yeah.
For him,
it just has a groove that I like. I don't know. Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's a great. It's a good tune, and I think it's I think it's the opener of side 2. So
okay. Let It Shine.
Yeah.
Another favorite.
This is so done with Jeff Lynne of ELO. He wanted to come in and work with Brian on a tune. And so that's super cool. He was one of the Traveling Wilburys in the 80s. And then, so that's a Brian and him, which is cool.
Yeah, and there's I don't know, I kind of like how there's certain instruments drop in and out on this one that I thought was pretty cool.
And to me, I think that's some of the cool guitar work that Andy Paley's doing on here, and it sounds like it's a 60s guitar through a 60s amplifier, and it sounds like it.
Nice,
yeah. On an 80s record.
Meet Me in My Dreams.
That's a Andy Paley and Brian collaboration. I love that. That's a stomping tune.
Yeah, I like this one. My dreams have been crazy lately, so I was like, well, this hits home right now. Very relevant for me. And then the only one I really didn't like is Rio Grande.
Really?
Yeah, I really didn't like this one.
So the funny story on this is Lenny Waronker, who was, I hope I just said that right, Waronker. Waronker. On most days I can say that. Well, he loved Cool Water from Sunflower, and he wanted Brian to do something gentle and something that might be like a sweet that he set up for Smile, but something with the gentleness of Cool Water from Sunflower. And so Brian and Paley, what it is it's a section. It's like sections of music that he had composed during the 80s put together as like a cowboy and Indian suite. There's one section in the middle of it that I think is one of the most beautiful things in the catalog.
Oh, really?
Where the mandolins start playing and he sings that, whoa, yay, 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 yay.
Okay. I was re-listen.
Yeah, there's parts of it that are not my favorite, but there's parts of it that are
pretty amazing,
really fantastic.
Okay,
yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
And I mean Rio Grande to not sound like a complete.
He says
white
Rio
person.
Grande,
Yeah.
Rio Grande. I'd swim you, but I can't. Yeah, so that's the whole thing. It was excellent reviews for that thing. I mean, and it went to number 54.
And so that's the end of the album when it originally got released, because there's other songs I had on here.
Oh yeah, they're just going to be all bonus tracks.
Like Get Your Old Poor Body.
Yeah,
to
those
Move,
were B-sides.
Being With the One I Love.
Yeah.
Let's Go to Heaven, My Car.
Yeah, those are all great. Those are good things, but they weren't part of the album proper. So let's don't.
We don't have.
We got ground to cover yet today.
Already long on this episode.
Kokomo.
Okay.
Same month that Brian releases his solo album. How Kind of Shitty. I don't know if they had it planned this way, but Kokomo gets released. Brian didn't get to be on Kokomo because Landy wanted to be an executive producer and had a big fight with the Beach Boys, so Brian didn't even go to the session. But we all know about Kokomo now.
Yeah.
And it's not my favorite tune, but Carl Wilson is just a powerhouse where he comes.
gosh.
That's that hook he sings in there. I think that's why that record went number one. But it was number one. I was in college. I remember watching it on Billboard. I'd get Billboard at school. You couldn't, no internet again.
Right.
So I'd run to the school library at Sam Houston State University in Huntsville, Texas, and go and get that copy of Billboard to see where Kokomo, because even though I didn't like the tune too much, it was exciting to see the Beach Boys having that kind of chart performance. And then when it hit number one, I just was, what in the hell has happened here? So their first number one in 22 years since Good Vibrations.
That's wild.
22 years. That is a record in the recording industry.
Probably still, right?
I would.
I can't imagine anyone else to touch that.
Yeah. So Kokomo blasted their deal wide open again, just like Endless Summer did in the 70s. And so here comes a whole new crop of Beach Boy fans.
Yeah.
To start. And this is when I start noticing in the late 80s and the early 90s, more people starting to pay attention, like more rabid fans.
Sure,
you know what
sure.
I mean? And so,
And so Kokomo, they released as a single?
No, it was on a soundtrack for the movie Cocktail that would feature Tom Cruise. That's big, it was driven by that, right? It was in that soundtrack for that movie, which I think that movie was a hit movie. And, a lot of the success of the tune was driven by the success of the movie. But, it wasn't then they put it on
Still Cruisin.
That was when they finally put it on an album. So let's get into talking about 89. Okay. Brian, right after his first solo record, him and Andy Paley start working on a batch of tunes for another one that's tentatively titled Sweet Insanity, which was probably Landy's idea. Landy's got his mitts all over this one. When it gets eventually submitted, I think in the early 90s, and we'll talk about that later on, but it gets rejected first, and it just psychobabble for a lot of the lyrics, but the music's great. Never does get released though.
Right.
But that's what Brian is working on by himself. The Beach Boys put together that Still Cruisin' album, which is, that it came out in 89 and it's on the heels of the success of Kokomo. And so we can
I didn't actually do a track by track breakdown on this one, only because I kind of had the same sentiment on all of them. There was nothing really that I don't know, I was really moved by.
Right. Well, let me go through it real quick then.
Okay.
Because Still Cruisin' is a kind of a rip on Kokomo, trying to do another come on, let's cruise, you got nothing to, and Aruba, Jamaica, so that's kind of trying to, that to me is just blatant, let's see if we can do another Kokomo a different way, Still Cruisin', right?
Yeah.
But Somewhere Near Japan is an amazing
that song,
tune.
That one took me, I think.
That's a Bruce and I can't remember, but it's
the second time I heard that one, I was just like, "Ooh, okay, this is." Because the first time I went through Still Cruisin', I was like, "This is not really hitting anything." And then when I went through it again, it was like, "Okay, no, this was the one that stuck out to me." I think of all of them.
Al does a song called "Island Girl." That's pretty strong,
Yeah,
it's kind of
okay.
just got kind of
a little lackluster for me.
Well, it's kind of kitschy a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just kind of. But still, it's a strong tune. I like it. And then Brian's original on here that Carl sings part of, which he actually recorded completely away from them and just had Carl put a vocal on, is "In My Car," which is it's a pretty cool tune. I like sections of it. And I'm trying to think of the other. There's a tune called "Make It Big" that's from a movie. The rest of them are from, and I kind of like that tune.
Is it from a movie? Because when I did hear that one, I was like, I felt like I had heard that one before. There is, however, on this album, I think my least favorite Beach Boys track, and that's the one where they have some hip hop artists.
Well, that's the Fat Boys, and they're singing "Wiped Out."
Yeah,
or they're with Brian, and that's almost gets. This is funny. It says the Beach Boys, but a lot of people think it's just all Brian stacking his voices. So it might have been Brian just going in the studio and making that with those guys. But the Beach Boys made a video with them, and it was that thing. I can't remember. It hit the charts pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man,
So
maybe back then it was, but and I'm not. I like some of the old school like hip hop rap stuff, but that one for me, I was just like, yikes. This
Yeah,
is,
well, I don't think I really cared for it at the time, and still not something I go back and listen. But I will tell you, it was popular.
It was
at this time.
popular.
Oh yeah, people were. So it was another thing that they had to put on this. I think it was done in '87. I should have put that where we should have talked about it, but it's on there. But then if you didn't, so included on there was "Wouldn't It Be Nice," because it had been in a movie, California Girls, and I Get Around. Those three. So kind of, and that ended the album. And I feel like I'm missing a tune here, but it's probably my big favorite from it is Somewhere Near Japan. But I was in college down there in Texas. I still remember going and getting that. Man, I played this thing all the time. The whole album, I remember listening to it all the time. And I think probably just the magic of the moment coming off the heels of Kokomo, and kind of everybody's like, we started to hear that Smile might come out. Of course, it wouldn't for another, I could say, oh, now Brian's thinking about, because of all the digital stuff he could put together. So it was like we were talking, but then we heard that, the whole catalog's going to get released on CDs, and they're going to do 2 albums on each one and do bonus tracks. And oh man, that set off about 1.5 years of wanting.
Right.
Because some of these albums I still didn't have yet.
Sure.
So that was a pretty cool time. There's one other significant thing that happens in the end of, I think it's 89. Brian sues at A&M Records, who Murray sold the catalog to in 1969. So 20 years later, Brian sues them, says that his signature was forged on the document that Murray did the deal with them back, and then broke Brian's heart, right? Mm-hmm. So anyway, and then they also, his lawyers, used the excuse that Brian's mental state at that time couldn't be counted upon for him to even make a decision like that. And so Brian sued them for $100 million.
Wow.
They settled out of court for 10.
Okay.
And then that brings up an episode, a little deal with Brian and Mike in the early to mid 90s that we'll talk about in the next episode.
So then that's pretty much it. Then that wraps up 89, and we'll get into the 90s.
Yeah.
You said we're going to decide on exactly how far we're going to go in this.
Maybe we better split the history into 2 more, and then one on Mike. Okay. So 3 more episodes. Maybe.
Okay. Sounds good. Yeah, I think that's good. So yeah, that's it for this episode. Thank you as always for listening, commenting, engaging with us. That really does help the word get out, the engagement.
And Adam's going to take me to school on that.
Literally,
after we get done.
We're going to record Melt Away, and then I'm going to show him how to make reply to comments.
I know how to reply to comments.
In an
I just don't know where to find them.
Yeah, in an efficient way. Yeah, because you don't have to go for the way you're going. So anyway, we will see you guys in the next episode. Thanks again for listening.